What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to High Floor Football. My name is Sam Wagman. I'm your host, and with me, as always, is my co-host Jay Arsh. Jay, how you doing tonight, my friend?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to have our guest on. Excited to talk some quarterbacks. We're almost a week away from the draft, so all is good.
Absolutely. And speaking of our guest, he is the illustrious Thor Nystrom. Thor, how you doing tonight? Tell everyone where they can find you, and if they didn't already know, what kind of stuff you're working on this month.
Yeah, I'm doing great. Good to be with you boys. You can find me on Twitter at ThorKU and my work at FantasyPros. We got all the NFL draft stuff. I'm just churning through the positions. Almost done with them. I only got 2 left, but after that, we're going to slot the 500 board with 500 comps that I do every spring. Very exciting time of the year. And yeah, we're only 9 days. 9 days from right now. The clock will be going, I believe. So yeah, we're getting close.
Absolutely. And it's truly the best time of the year. And the 500 is one of my favorite things that you do every single year. I have numerous friends who ascribe to it as well. I can't wait to see that. And you also just released your second mock draft. I dropped that down in the description of this video. You can take a look at that, and we're going to go over that a little bit. But I really want to ask one question to you to start off this show, and it's something that's been ping-ponging around Twitter the last few weeks and obviously the draft world as a whole. Should Bryce Young be going 101 or should CJ Stroud?
Definitely Bryce Young. Yeah. I don't know if that smoke in the betting market initially, I think that was just a height threshold thing, a supposition based on Frank Reich's past. But if you just look at the guys objectively, bake in everything, Bryce Young's the better prospect. I almost said the word processor because he has a much better processor. He has an elite processor. You just don't see guys process the field that way that come into the league every year. It's like a once a decade kind of a thing. And Bryce Young is that guy. Now you get it in this pint-sized package, but he proved it at the highest level of college football the past 2 years at Alabama. I'm not concerned about his transition at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw somebody mentioning recently, you almost see more Bryce Young comps to point guards than you do quarterbacks, just the way he's able to facilitate and kind of run the tempo of the offense. What were you going to say, Sam?
Yeah, and I noticed, Thor, you Compton, speaking of point guards, probably one of the better point guard-ish type quarterbacks that we've seen enter the league in some time in Russell Wilson. So exactly what exactly led you to that player comp as well there?
Basically, it was as close as I could get. It ain't perfect because there's never been a quarterback prospect like Bryce Young, but it was as close as I could get in terms of jiving both the size and then the ethos of staying in the pocket to make the play with your arm. When Bryce Young came out of high school, the comp he got was Kyler Murray. That's all the recruiting services compared him to Kyler Murray. And initially you see him moving around the field and then the way he throws the ball, you can see that for sure. And that was the one that stuck in my mind for a couple of years. But the reason I couldn't use that for his NFL draft comp is it's misleading to the reader. Kyler Murray uses his legs as much to escape and to get outside the pocket and do damage in the open field as he does, scrambling around. And of course he does use it to scramble around, but he's perfectly happy to tuck the ball and run. Not Bryce Young. That's not what Bryce Young has analogous, like twitch in his lower half. He's twitchy, both lower half and upper half, in my opinion. The kid's made of rubber bands. But he doesn't use his mobility for that reason. Like he uses it to just work around the garbage in the backfield. And it's just super fun watching him scramble around. He's actually looking to extend the play to give his wide receivers, the broken off play attempts, whatever, where the broken coverage, where then all of a sudden, the extended play and now there's confusion in the back end and who's got him and could Bryce run? Invariably he ends up throwing, and it's almost always to an open guy or a guy that he makes open by the throw that he makes.
Yeah. And Sam referenced your mock draft when we started. It came out on the 10th, so about a week ago. And I know this isn't your take on who you would take second overall, but you do have Will Levis second.
Yeah. Well said.
Yeah, I know that's not your take on it, but there's a lot of smoke going around, if Houston's going to take a quarterback, if they're going to pass on one. I personally can't imagine them not taking one, letting the Colts have a chance at taking, their first shot at the quarterback 2 in this draft and having to play in the same division as this guy for the next, odd amount of years. So I guess you can decide where you want to go with this. Do you want to tell us who your quarterback 2 is and why he's there, or, maybe why you think Will Levis could be at the second one taken?
It's CJ Stroud by margin. Then you got to drop off in the way that I see it. You got to drop off to Anthony Richardson, but Anthony Richardson, I would have Bryce Young and CJ Stroud in tier 1 because they're just so far and away better than the other guys, or at least surer things for the NFL. They're going to both be starting on day 1, and they both have high floors because of their specific skill sets, whatever. But like I'd have a drop after those 2 guys to Richardson, and then less of a drop, but a drop nonetheless down to Levis. And we can talk about that in a second. But yeah, like I'm still a believer in CJ Stroud. It's just the whispers we're getting out of the Houston building is that they might not be. Yeah.
So let me ask, I guess, why do you think it's not, they're not as interested in CJ Stroud? Do you believe in the agent thing? Do you believe that they don't want to, interact with his agent anymore? You just think he's not really the type of quarterback? There's all the rumors too about Ballard, or say kind of the type of quarterback that they look for, maybe more like toolsy guy, like a Levis, like a Richardson. Do you think that's the reason they would maybe pass on Stroud? Or sorry, I mean Houston. I'm talking about. I got mixed up there for a second.
Did you guys ever have a buddy that dated a crazy chick?
Yes.
It's like your question to me is like you trying to figure out with one of your buddies why the crazy chick did a crazy thing. There's all kinds of theories for it. I mean, you could try to go back to the source or suss out psychological things, but crazy people do crazy things and stupid organizations do stupid things. Do I know exactly what's behind that? Or do I know definitively that it's not some elaborate ruse smokescreen? D'Amico Ryans was around the 49ers organization when they did their subterfuge about Trey Lance a couple years ago, whatever. Now that year I had that one snuffed out. I thought it was going to be Trey Lance from, basically in the days after when they made that trade, even when everyone was saying Mac Jones, just because circumstantially it didn't make sense to give up 3 years of drafts for a guy as physically limited as Mac Jones. You could tell they were swinging for the fence. And if they were swinging for the fence, it just categorically couldn't be Mac Jones. I didn't care what Adam Schefter said or anybody like that.
Right.
This one I happened to I just don't know what like incentive Houston would have to put out false flags here. Like, I just don't know what they're getting out of that, because, you're like, well, you could make other teams behind you think, yada, yada. But for what purpose? What sort of thing are they advancing there? If they do that, it's the idea that they're giving off to the rest of the league is, we don't believe in CJ Stroud, but now on the other hand, they're trying to increase the trade value for CJ Stroud. That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't pass the smell test. I tend to believe the reports that we're getting on this one, that either they're, gonna, well, in either case, I think they're going to bypass CJ Stroud.
Mm-hmm.
What, the outcome I had then was Levis, because I think that there's a shot that Levis is above Stroud on their board. You've certainly heard a lot more optimistic things vis-a-vis Levis coming out of Houston than you have Stroud during this process. So that's why I had that one. But if I put out a mock draft today, I would have had Will Anderson in that slot. Mm-hmm. It makes a lot of sense with D'Amico Ryans, particularly if they end up staying in that slot. Assuredly they're gonna look around for trade offers, whatnot. But if they stay in that slot, obviously they have all those problems in the defensive front seven, and what a better way to start trying to fix it if you're a guy like D'Amico Ryans than taking one of the most gifted pure pass rushers we've seen come into the league last 10-15 years.
Sure.
Yeah. For the Texans, then does the conversation then kind of transfer to 2024 and kind of securing that top pick for Caleb Williams then for them, as they're obviously not going to go down another year without a quarterback?
Well, in that moment, it would just shift to the 12th pick, and are the Texans calling any teams now trying to move up for a prospect that they didn't like enough to take it to, but they're supposing is going to fall down a little bit? Well, because that could happen. And then there's also the rumors out there that they're interested in Mac Jones, whatever, which is just funny in conjunction with the rumors that Nick Caserio might leave the Texans for the Patriots right after the draft. Mm-hmm. So the league might have to investigate that one if we get a a Mac Jones trade to Houston, and then Nick Caserio leaves right away to go to the organization he just overpaid to. But like, again, it's the crazy check. I don't know what they're going to do. Nobody knows what they're going to do. We don't know what they're going to do at 2. We don't know what their intention is at 12. We don't know what their quarterback plan is. But yeah, I mean, if they come out of the first round without a quarterback and without having traded for one, they will have sent a clear message. We are tanking this coming season because we're going for Caleb Williams.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And I like your initial take on it, that CJ Stroud, that they just don't like him for whatever reason it is, for whatever reason, we can, try and assume or figure out. They just might pass on him for some of these other quarterbacks, or Will Anderson, like you said. Sam's going to get tired of me mentioning it, but I put in a bet on CJ Stroud being the third quarterback taken 2 weeks ago. It was at plus 1,000. Now that's down to plus 340. I mean, so the books are clearly thinking that too, that the crazy, they're going to go for the crazy girlfriend there at number 2. Tell us a little bit then, I guess, going into that second tier of guys. You said Levis, Richardson. There seems to be, a lot of misconceptions around both of them, I would say. There's kind of, is Richardson, more of a project? That was kind of the initial thing that people were saying. And now I've heard a lot of people that have dug more into Richardson saying, you might not actually be as much of a project as people think, not only, in terms of just the rushing upside, but he has, a little bit more touch as a passer than people initially might have thought. How did you kind of break it up between those two? And what are your thoughts on, Richardson and Levis in that second tier?
Yeah, I think that's well put and well set up. I agree with all those statements. As far as Richardson goes, he's so flashy with the athletic package. Obviously, he got the perfect 10 RAS, and he did most of the tests, whatnot, and just dominated the combine. But like, that's what people invariably focus on, and when they discuss his passing, all you'll hear usually is what his completion percentage was, and used in a way to disparage him without any of the context behind it. And there's a whole lot of context behind it. I mean, for instance, Anthony Richardson, 4 straight seasons, has had a different offensive coordinator and a different head coach. Or I'm sorry, and a quarterback coach. Different offensive coordinator and different quarterback coach. 4 straight years, going back to his senior year of high school. I think he had 3 in the aggregate, 3 different head coaches in those 4 seasons. So you have that. You have all the different scheme changes. This year was another scheme change for him. Billy Napier took over for that dip Dan Mullen, that was misusing his talent when he was there. And Napier's system, it gets you on the perimeter a lot and stuff like that. It made use of Richardson's mobility, but like, in terms of having to learn that scheme right away, and it wasn't the best. It wouldn't have been the way that I would use Anthony Richardson completely. I would have tried to get his mobility going more in ways where he could threaten in the open field or use the rocket launcher a little bit more. But he learns that. And then just as far as the road thing about his completion percentage, yeah, that's at the bottom of the class. And if you can compare it to last, you've seen all these different things on Twitter and stories about, over the last 20 years, the first round prospects, their completion percentage. And, he's always at the bottom, or they'll do the little ink blots, and different stuff like that. But if you simply just change it to on target throws, then he goes way up. You never see that by people who are arguing against him, because it acknowledges that he put a F ton of balls on hands last year and they clanged off because Florida's receiving group stunk.
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, you definitely have to take into effect, and I'm a Gators fan, so I'm well acquainted with all the issues Ricky Pearsall and Shorter and all those guys are just little white guys that can't catch footballs. So they had all the issues there, and then like you said, adjusting to Napier's offensive scheme. But Richardson, aside from being really on target, like you said, when he threw the ball on target, was just the most athletic quarterback we've ever seen at the combine. And I saw you can't comp him to Cam Newton. I can't help but think back to what a gifted prospect Newton was, and how much of basically a sure thing it was that he was going to go 101 in his draft class. So why are we really not hearing the same thing about Richardson because of the accuracy issues? There was a Football Outsiders article that was published today in ESPN Plus that ranked Richardson's bust chance at 80%. Is that egregious? Is it right? Are we kind of getting too ahead of ourselves there?
I don't agree with that. I don't know how you can put him into a mathematical model like that and feel confident about what it spits out when we've never seen a kid like that before. Right. No one, and now we have the quantifiable data on this. We just haven't seen a prospect like that, at that position, whatever. So I don't agree with that. And, again, like, I think, his athleticism and what you can do with that, it speaks for itself. And that's an area of quarterbacks games that is consistently sort of under talked about or I guess underappreciated by draft Twitter and these folks, as far as the actual real life value that brings to your offense. It's not just that it opens up more spacing for you when you're throwing, and it's not just that you can steal all these yards and run for however many yards just on your own. We saw how devastating Lamar Jackson, like the value that he brought just as a runner. We also have data from PFF about the yards per carry that it adds to your running backs total by simply having a quarterback who runs. They had some sort of study where it was like, if that quarterback ran, over X amount of time, I don't know if it was 100 times or whatever number it had or whatever, the on average, the amount of yards per carry that added to the running back, 0.3 or 0.4, something like that. I don't remember the exact stuff, but it did add, right? And then when you start thinking about that over a volume, that's a value that you have to discuss. But then, again, going back to him in the pocket, I don't think he gets nearly enough credit for that. We mentioned sort of the context about some of this stuff. He doesn't get the benefit of the doubt on that. And he also doesn't ever get complimented for the things he does good outside of just having a bazooka for an arm. I'll give you one example in comparing him to Will Levis. Will Levis does not sense pressure whatsoever. We call this pocket presence, and he is devoid of it. A lot of times he'll get ragdolled in the pocket because he just doesn't sense the guys coming from behind him, and he'll get smoked. But on the instances when he does, or when it comes from the interior and you can see it coming a little bit more, when he has a chance to do something with the ball, you'll notice all the time that he makes stupid decisions with it. He makes mistakes with the ball. It goes without saying that he doesn't set up mechanically in those instances. And you also have because people do the argument with Levis of like, oh, well, mechanically, if he just works on the mechanics, his accuracy will improve, which technically is true. Like in college, even in clean pockets, Levis there was be a lot of throws where he wouldn't even square his shoulder to the target, certainly wouldn't have his base under him. He'd be like just a super gifted, like Uncle Rico from Napoleon Dynamite. But if he had a right arm from God, and just flicks it or whatever, but it actually does go over the mountain with Will Levis. But the problem is, like, he's like a sniper that doesn't put the base under the gun. So he's like holding it. And it's like, bro, if you just put the base under it, you'd be more accurate with your shots, especially when you're trying to shoot a long way away. But, again, like, yes, if he got more diligent with it, it's not that he can't do it. It's just that, he's nonchalant with it, whatever. But the problem with that idea is when you've seen this kid for a couple years now, not only not be able to sense the pressure, but panic once the enemy's at the gate. He ain't doing anything with his mechanics at that point. Like, how do you jive that thing? Right? Like, you can reliably pick out the bust quarterbacks in the first round of the NFL draft. You go back a decade plus by the guys whose play craters under pressure or when any sort of circumstances change, right? Like against the better opponents, that, against the worst opponents, that they're really good, against the better ones, whatever. This is exactly how I picked out that both Drew Lock and Zach Wilson were going to bust. And I banged the drum for it their entire process. Guys, just look at their numbers under pressure, look at their numbers against better teams, and watch their film in both cases. See the decisions they make. How are you going to extrapolate that towards all of a sudden under duress against better athletes at the next level? Now my decision-making is going to get better. But this is something that I appreciate about Anthony Richardson's game, is that he does not only does he sense the pressure, he doesn't panic under it whatsoever. In fact, you see like Bryce Young, you'd probably put on that plane just because that's where Bryce Young exists. Like he doesn't mind, moving around the bodies and having guys, have a shot at him, whatever, so he can get that pass off. With Anthony Richardson, he knows even if a guy is a stride or two away from him, that he can spring either direction and outrun the guy, both with his side-to-side movement and then the acceleration out the door. So he doesn't panic at all. He waits until the last second. And if he truly can't, do anything with the movement at that point, he'll bail on the play and throw it out of bounds. But he doesn't put it up for grabs, and he doesn't get blasted for big, sacks and whatnot, or fumble the ball.
Yeah. Well, talking about his pocket presence and, kind of having to develop in that way, I think something that also maybe doesn't get talked about enough. I mean, Will Levis is going to be 24 before the season starts, which, a lot of the big comparisons people make in terms of the development that he's going to have to make is, what about Josh Allen? And look what Jalen Hurts did, and look at what these other guys did. Those guys came into the league when they were 2, almost 3 years younger than Will Levis. Do you think that's going to be a problem for him at all too, where, if he does get drafted to a team and the idea is, he might need, a little bit of time, a little bit of, polish to him. Do you think it's going to, impact him? I mean, like you said, we've seen him play a lot of football, a lot more than you've seen Anthony Richardson play.
Well, I would invert that a little bit from the other side of it and just ask the question. This kid's been on campus now, 2 different places under 2 pretty good staffs for 5 years or whatever. How did he never get better under pressure?
Yeah.
How did he never show more diligence to the mechanics? Those are the things that I wonder. It's not about the ceiling this, the ceiling that, as far as that stuff goes, because to me, his right arm speaks for itself. Sure. The different, me and then the people that are absolutely obsessed with Will Levis, we see his right arm the exact same. But the reason that we're way off in terms of where we rank him is because of those 2 things that I just talked about. And I think the people that are super bullish on him, they just, it's like, oh, he's going to go to the NFL, and with NFL coaching, he'll figure it out. But then they also want to give him benefit of the doubt on the other side that he worked with an NFL coach at Kentucky, Liam Cohen. They both want to give him credit for that. Are like, oh, he did all the calls, and, all the play calls were 30 words, and he knew it all. And he had everyone in the, where to go and everything like that. And he played in an NFL system. And it's like, okay, great. Why didn't he develop NFL habits in the pocket then? Hello.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. And to me, I think it speaks a lot that, the whole Liam Cohen thing, they said we're feeding him the same stuff we fed to Matthew Stafford and this and that.
Bananas with the peels on them.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, another thing that I just can't get over, we hear people, bring up the fact that, guys, we saw Joe Burrow lose out to Justin Fields and, everyone else there at Ohio State. We saw Jake Fromm beat out a couple of guys down in Georgia. And then they said, well, Levis, despite not being able to beat out Sean Clifford at Penn State, can make a difference. But I just feel like the fact that he couldn't beat out Sean Clifford, of all people, who is objectively not a good quarterback at all, is just a massive red flag to me. So, I mean, I can't get on board with Levis. It's just too many things. The mayo in the coffee. It's too many things that just stick out as red flags to me.
For sure. Yeah. No, I agree with that. I mean, James Franco back then, you're, both with, his ethos with quarterbacks with McSorley and then with Clifford, at least they'd make the correct decisions on the plays, right? Mm-hmm. They're not putting the ball up for grabs and different stuff like that. You're not going to take losses with them. It's like you don't have the long drive on the golf course, but you're consistently keeping it on the fairway. That's what you're doing with those guys. And yeah, he chose that over Levis because of the things that we're talking about here. Yeah, absolutely. So I do want to backtrack a little bit because we didn't really get to dive into CJ Stroud and his kind of, inside his game a little bit. So you said he's your second tier, he's your second rated prospect. He's, a little bit narrowly behind Bryce Young. What exactly do you love and not love about CJ Stroud, and why have you dropped him behind Bryce Young? Well, I think his accuracy and his placement are some of the best we've seen from a quarterback coming out. Well, since I've been doing this 5-6 years, mm-hmm. I mean, you wouldn't, maybe not at the very top of the list, but you're putting him right dang near the top in terms of that. I love the way that he developed his own game in the pocket. And he's very diligent with it. He didn't grow up super privileged and stuff. He grew up in this warehouse, above a warehouse or whatever in California. But unlike Bryce Young, one of the 2 other 5 stars in that recruiting class, the other one was DJ Uiagalelei, who now has begun his own weird journey. Now is in Corvallis, Oregon. But CJ Stroud, he had to study how to play quarterback on YouTube as opposed to getting a quarterback coach. And like, you know, I thought about that a lot, you know, like during the season and especially afterwards when he was not leaving the pocket at all, like earlier in the season. Like, I mean, it was almost like he was glued in there and affixed, you know, like inside the pocket or whatever. And I had lost a little bit of confidence in him. I'll be honest, like just during the regular season, because it's like, bro, like it's not going to be the same in the NFL where you have 3 stud receivers and then you can just sort of sit back there and you never have to like run around. Like you're going to have to show that you can not only use your legs, but also that you can make decisions, like good decisions on the run and retain your accuracy and your placement. And that's obviously why the Georgia game was so important, because he was under duress that entire game. And he did that stuff. He used his legs, was making smart decisions, was throwing dimes on the move, different stuff like that we just hadn't seen. So those are things that I like about his game. I just wish I would have seen Georgia CJ Stroud more often. If I had seen that kid all last season, I might be ranking him number 1. Because if you add the accuracy and the placement that he has, and he makes really good decisions besides, sees the field really well. Interestingly, when they asked him at the combine about like, bro, like the same thing I just said, like, why didn't you use your legs more earlier in the season? Why did it take for the Georgia game for you to finally start leaving your spot and moving around and different stuff like that? And his response is really interesting. He said, like, if you work on a play for 10 hours, one play for 10 hours with your teammates, you don't want to bail on it when your first read isn't there. You don't even want to bail on it when your second read's not there. Like you want to go through all your different progressions and try to make the best decision once you have. And I don't want to bail on the plays. I thought that was a great explanation. I thought it spoke to his, you know, to the type of player that he is and the way that he sees the game, whatnot. I think in the NFL, you got enough of an indication that you know, the mobility thing and the making decisions on the run, the accuracy, different stuff like that. You got enough of proof of concept of that in the Georgia game, or at least a hope that that's, you know, something that can be fleshed out and he'll incorporate more in the NFL when the offense is not going to be the same as with Ohio State and the talent level. There's no longer a big discrepancy where, you know, in terms of your teammates against the opponents, where it more or less equalizes out. That's where the legs thing will be a lot more important. And I do expect we'll see more of that because I think he's a bit of an underrated athlete.
Yeah. Do you worry that his, you know, and going back to that question about, you know, him going through his progressions, do you worry that that's going to lead him to take a lot of sacks, you know, early on in his career, or will he kind of, you know, have that taken care of by his position coach once he gets to training camp?
Well, he definitely senses the rush. It's just that's one of those, you know, there's multiple different manifestations of why it was important to get the, you know, to see the mobility aspect of his game during that Georgia thing. This is one of them, right? Like, because it, you know, I mean, even if you go back to his own explanation of this, where it's like, you know, you go through first option, second option, third option, fourth option. Well, CJ, there are plays where the best option is tucking and running. Yeah, you don't want to do it right away, but especially when teams know that you're not going to leave the pocket, they can delineate more coverage resources back or in the intermediate area and just leave that space open, whatnot, because they know you're not going to take advantage of it. But once you start doing that, not only do you steal yards in the short term, you put that in the defense's head in the long term. So it plays both of those different things up. So I like that would be one of the big things in response to your question about the pressure, because if he can move around in the NFL, like that's going to buy him more time, whatnot.
Okay. I have one more thing before we move on to the last guy in the top 5 here. I'm curious as to where you think the best landing spots for the quarterbacks not named Bryce Young are, because we're pretty certain at this point he's going to go to the Panthers. It seems to be a done deal at this point. So what about the other 3 guys? Where do you think that they should go, you know, in a best case scenario for them?
Well, I know the Raiders like Anthony Richardson, and I think that would be a pretty good fit. You know, just stylistically, Anthony Richardson, like the freakiest, you know, athlete of a quarterback ever, playing for Al Davis's franchise in the silver and black. Like this guy with, you know, just an unforeseen physical package with this bazooka of an arm. I think that would be cool. And like I said, I know that the Raiders like him. And not only that, it's not a great roster, no, but like you have the thing in place of what he needs in year one, which is to just sit and learn, right? Like and different stuff like that. And then you can work on his mechanics and different stuff like that. And you know that his mechanics are going to hold up under duress if you can fix that aspect of his game, whatnot. But he can sit behind Jimmy G because you already signed Jimmy G. And then you have the veteran guy, you know, that will also have the baseball hat with the clipboard on the sideline that'll be, you know, giving them lessons and stuff during the game, and Brian Hoyer, right? Yeah. So like you have a good structure there. So I would say the Raiders for Richardson, with Levis, it seems like their owner, speaking of crazy, Irsay, that he really likes Levis. And I think that would be interesting, Jimmy Irsay getting his way on that one. And then just, you know, I mean, they're rolling the dice and see the way that would go. But to me, they're the most sort of realistic team there. I don't think the Raiders like Levis. So it's Levis. He's an interesting case where it's like the show could start for him at 2. We could hear his name at 2. We could also, there's a distinct possibility that we hear it at 4, probably better odds. But the interesting thing is if he doesn't go 4, that's where that scenario that you saw people mocking about a couple weeks ago, where it was like a 1-week fad. We go through fads with the mock drafts, but where you started to see Levis, you know, getting mocked in the teens, that would be the scenario where that actually could still happen, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you know, if because Indianapolis, you know, could, you know, if they don't take him, I don't think Las Vegas is going to take him. Like if he's on the, I just don't think so. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. And so that's, you know, that could start that. But of teams that are realistic at the top of the board, I'll say the Colts. And then with CJ Stroud, I'm just crossing my fingers and praying for the scenario of the Minnesota Vikings, who we know have done a lot of clandestine work on this quarterback class. They've been sniffing around hard. And Kirk Cousins wanted to sign an extension, and Kwesi's like, yeah, not so fast, my friend. Like those two things were going on at the same time. So it's like, man, it seems like there's a better shot than some people think that the Vikings are going to get aggressive for a quarterback. I would love to see them trade up the board in this scenario where CJ Stroud falls. Now, maybe CJ Stroud does ultimately go to Houston. They just did a really good, you know, they did the Trey Lance story part 2 in terms of the smoke screen. Or, you know, maybe he goes to the Colts. But like if somehow he fell past that, and there are scenarios where that could happen, all it takes is the Colts liking Levis more, and Houston, you know, taking the edge rusher or whatever at 2. If that happens, and now it becomes like CJ Stroud's on the clock at 6, the Vikings, and Kwesi only been on the job for 1 year now. He has already worked out 2 major trades with the Detroit Lions, their current administration, including one in the first round last year. When he was new on the job, it was sort of his christening, when in that case, the Vikings were the one jumping down to the bottom of the round. But if Stroud's on the board at 6, I'm going to be really interested to know if the Vikings are calling up the Lions, making an offer to try to move up the board. I would love that fit. I think CJ Stroud would be a perfect fit for Kevin O'Connell's system. And there's a few teams in the league that I believe will have CJ Stroud higher on their board than Bryce Young. It just depends on if you want the facilitator or if CJ Stroud or the creator that is Bryce Young. I think the Vikings are a team that would rather have the facilitator, because Kevin O'Connell really believes in his scheme. He doesn't want a kid out there who's just freelancing every play and just like he decides in the moment. I think Kevin O'Connell wants the dude to run his system, and CJ Stroud profiles to do, you know, be fabulous at that and give you all the accuracy and the placement stuff that we talked about. I think O'Connell would see him as a toy, and then you get to work with Jefferson too for the next hour long.
Yeah, I'm glad you took it there with CJ Stroud of the Vikings, because when you started talking about Will Levis dropping, I was going to put the nightmare in your head of, you know, maybe the Vikings scooting up and getting him. Because I'd seen you on Twitter a couple weeks. Yeah, I know. I'd seen you a couple weeks ago when some mocks were coming out with him, and you were like, "No, thanks, no, we don't want that."
I'd rather have him than Hooker.
Jay and I were talking about it earlier. What if Levis falls to the Vikings? Do we get to ask Thor that question tonight on the show? And I think we both agree that would be pretty much a disaster in the Nystrom household if that happened.
Well, the biggest disaster would be Hooker. That's it. Hooker at 23. Like, I'm considering putting my house on the market. I'm giving up my Vikings fandom. Like, that would be enough. We've been kicked in the balls for, 38 years of my life now by this franchise. That would be the final straw for me. You take that kid with the 23rd overall pick. With Levis, at least, you have that sort of rainbow of like something that you can dream on. right? Do I think he can be fixed? No, I don't happen to. But at 23, at at the position that Levis plays and the value that has, and the cheat code we all know, having a rookie, like on the rookie deal, whatnot, I would take Levis at 23 if I was the Vikings. If he fell down there, I wouldn't trade up for him. I would give nothing to trade up, even if he was falling down the board. Okay, if you fall into our laps, great. But otherwise, we got other things going on. But with Hendon Hooker, I wouldn't take that kid before the 3rd round.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a great segue for us to get into the pretty much consensus 5th prospect on the board in Hendon Hooker. So, look, we already know you don't like him. Tell us why.
Yeah. Well, there's I mean, the obvious things that everybody brings up. He's going to be 26 as a rookie. He's coming off the ACL injury from November, where his whole rookie season is essentially going to be a wash. Like, even if he's able to come back, then you're not throwing that kid in off the ACL injury right when he comes back into the starting lineup. So you're getting 0 from him as a rookie that's going to turn 26 that year. His first opportunity to play even will be when he's 27. Who knows what kind of work he can get in during that rookie season, in terms of the on-field stuff, or, I guess he can sit in the film room or whatnot, but he needs a lot of work. That kid is an enormous project, even if he was totally healthy. We talk about like the offense that Heupel runs. I think Heupel is the best play caller in college football, bar none. And he has been now for a really long time. We mentioned Drew Lock earlier. Josh Heupel made Drew Lock a lot of money by scheming him a lot of open touchdown throws as a redshirt freshman. Albert O, too, a guy that changed directions like the Suez Tug Canal boat, or whatever. Like, he got him a bunch of money because Albert O would just run a straight line. He'd be wide open because of the way that Heupel deployed him. But in that offense, when the quarterback gets the ball or whatever, it's not just that it's half field. I mean, yes, the field is cleaved in half for sure. There are other, offenses like that, and quarterbacks we've seen in the classes that have the half field offense, whatever. Heupel's goes a step or 2 or 10 further than that, though, in that he every single time turn on one of Hendon Hooker's cut-ups, like where you can watch all the plays like machine gun style in 4 minutes in one game. Try to denote how many times Hendon Hooker is, he turns his shoulders to the side of the field where, that's where the ball is going. Try to count how many times per game you see Hendon Hooker turn his shoulders to the other side. I'll give you a hint. You're barely ever going to see it. There was one of the games I was watching of the All-22. I didn't see it happen until late second half. I think it was in the 4th quarter. I forgot what team they were playing. But the only reason was it was another design call. They had won on a play where they had trips to the bottom of the field off of motion earlier in the game. Like, I think it was the previous quarter. And so in that game, they did on this specific play, they did the same thing. They had a dude motion down. They were in the same, formation and everything. And so, on the one before, they had thrown a little screen pass to this receiver who had motion. Right. So then they had the 2 receivers in front of them who were blocking, and they stole a chunk of yards on that because they had a numbers advantage and it was easy. So on this play, Kentucky's like, we're not letting you do that free stuff no more. We're shifting over there. You will not have a numbers advantage. We know what's coming. So Hendon Hooker gets the snap and shotgun, and he squares his shoulders to that side of the field. And then for the first time all game, he immediately flipped to the other side of the field where, Jalen Hyatt had some poor schlub on an island and was just sprinting past him like, bye-bye. And all Hendon Hooker had to do was throw a lollipop. That was the only time all game he went to the other side of the field, and that was the design of the play, right? So you never see him, that whole thing. You don't have to see him do the full field. You don't even have to see him where his shoulders aren't already pre-squared a millisecond after he gets the ball. The other thing is he's a dual threat who isn't actually a dual threat. First of all, at Virginia Tech, when he didn't have a good offensive play caller, all he could do was run. He stunk in the pocket. That's why Virginia Tech didn't care that he left. So he was really just a single threat there. Then he goes to Tennessee to play for Heupel. He loses the job coming out of camp to Joe Milton, who has even less pocket presence than Will Levis and has 0 accuracy whatsoever. I mean, he makes Anthony Richardson look. He makes Anthony Richardson look like Drew Brees in terms of his accuracy or whatever. But then Milton struggles in the first or second game or whatever. Then they put in Hooker. And yeah, Hooker had a very good last couple years or whatever. But like, again, it was in that scheme and they had talent as well. That the last thing I'll say about the dual threat aspect of it, I think I'm going to do this memory off the top of my head. I don't have it in front of me, but I think this is right. It was 155 times over the last 2 years where Hendon Hooker was moved off his spot. I believe in those 155 occurrences, he completed 7 passes. When he tucks, he is running. It just is what it is. When he moves off his spot whatsoever, because you never see him move his feet. He's just a statue in the pocket with his shoulders pre-squared, and then he throws it to his first read. I don't know how anyone can watch his game and be like, oh yeah, that's a surefire NFL guy. We have to take him in the first round, even though he's 26 years old and is going to miss his entire rookie year with an ACL injury, which sinks 20% of that sheet called rookie contract, which is the whole reason that you overpay for quarterbacks. It makes absolutely no sense. He's a 3rd round prospect. It just is what it is.
Yeah. Do we get Brandon Weeden vibes from him?
Yeah, he is Brandon Weeden. Okay. He's Brandon Weeden that can run a little bit. Brandon Weeden also came out of a gimmicky offense. There are some similarities outside of just the age. Obviously, different types of players. But I mean, we should have seen all the red flags of Brandon Weeden. They were obvious as day. If you just panned out. And it's the same thing with Hendon Hooker. If you look at him with open eyes, as opposed to just looking at his statistical profile under the best play caller that we've seen in college football in the modern era.
Yeah. We had Alfredo Brown on to talk wide receivers last week. And, we got to talking about Cedric Tillman and Jalen Hyatt, and the amount of times that Alfredo showed us that, Heupel's creative play calling just was the absolute engine of so many of the explosive plays, as well as the success for, both Hendon Hooker and Jalen Hyatt. It was absolutely mind-boggling. And I said it last week, and I'll say it again here. I know we're going to be talking about these guys as kind of collateral damage to each other. Whatever happens to Jalen Hyatt is probably how NFL coordinators and GMs will view Hendon Hooker as well, just as products of an offense that was extremely well run and was designed at a level to just scheme guys wide open and for Hooker to have easy throws. So definitely lines up with what you told us. Jay, what you got there?
Well, I was going to say, Thor mentioned, the mock drafts go through trends, and, the draft community goes through trends of kind of what's going to happen. And, a couple weeks ago, I felt like, and it was almost unimaginable because I didn't actually think it would go 4x4 with the quarterbacks going top 4. But I started to just think about it with all these quarterback needy teams, Indy picking at 4, potentially having to move up with a Houston or move up one spot with Arizona to get their guy. Do you think there's any chance that that still could happen? If Bryce Young goes 1, Houston takes whoever they take at 2, whether it's Levis, Richardson, if they, the smoke screen's not real, they take CJ Stroud. I don't know. I know in your mock draft you have Will Anderson going 3 to Arizona. I can't see a scenario though where Arizona really can't move out of that spot. But that seems to be the big talk right now, is that there isn't that much traction for teams trying to move up to 3 to pick their quarterback, and it seems like a quarterback will just fall into Indy's lap. I just look at all these teams there. Like you talked about Vegas, we talked about I even think maybe Detroit, Seattle, if a guy falls to them at 5. I mean, it seems like there's a legit 6 out of 7 teams in that top 7 that could realistically take a quarterback. Do you think there's any chance that it could go those top 4 quarterbacks still, or you think that's kind of out the window? Either Houston's not taking one or Arizona's, going a different direction.
There's a shot, but certainly lower than we initially thought, and it's going to require 2 things: either Houston to stand pat and take a quarterback, or to trade it to a team that is moving up for a quarterback, and a trade in the next pick. Because obviously Arizona ain't going to take a quarterback. But, we what we do know is we have sort of an Oreo sandwich here, where on the one side, we know that Carolina is going to take a quarterback first. And at that 4th pick, pretty reasonable that we can say that Indianapolis will be taking a quarterback there. So that the quarterbacks are going 1 and 4. It's just the 2nd and 3rd one. We've already talked about how nobody can know what the Houston is thinking at any time. Sure. And then with Arizona, I think it just comes down to the teams lower than them. Did the guy fall that they love, right? Obviously there are teams that really like CJ Stroud. Can one of those, if one of them happens to be the Vikings, could they, when you're talking about the 3rd slot, it's much bigger than the 6th scenario that we were talking about earlier. If Stroud gets down there, because with the 3rd slot, I've run the trade chart on this thing. What the Vikings would have to give up to move from 23 to 3, it's your 1st rounder this year, You don't have your second rounder because of the Hawkinson trade. So but you'd have to give your third as well. So you wipe out your day 1 and day 2 today this year to get Stroud, but also your next 2 first-round picks. If you offer those 4 picks, that jives it, right? Like, would Arizona take? I'm not sure, because then that would be up to their prerogative of like, are we going to bypass a blue chip defender? But then get this enormous amount of future draft equity that their coach, that dippy guy that went up to Rondale Moore when he was meeting him and was like, boo, boo, boo.
Gannon.
Yeah, Gannon. God, that guy's weird. But anyway,
we know.
We're both Eagles fans. We know Gannon.
Yeah, we know. We're well familiar.
What did he say? He was like, did he say flash
plays
before
shot?
Oh, shot plays.
Oh yeah, shot plays.
Shots. Boo, boo, boo.
He talks like you're like, he talks like you're like freshman orientation guy when you get to college. He's like, yeah, we're gonna have so much fun, we're gonna hit the bars, we're gonna get drunk, we're gonna do all this.
Just keep your beer in the red cups. I won't know. I'll look the other way. Yeah, exactly. Boo, boo, shots.
Such a weird vibe from him.
Yeah, that was
to me, it feels like that would be a move that Arizona could make, in that hypothetical scenario, because
it's not crazy.
Yeah, I mean, they don't seem like they're contending. They have the second worst Super Bowl odds in the league right now. Kyler Murray is probably not going to contribute until midseason. So, it's definitely probably a lost year there. It's interesting to think about. I do want to ask one more thing. Is there any quarterback outside the top 5 that really intrigues you to the point of where you could see them having an NFL career worth talking about?
There's a couple interesting ones. I mean, your odds, you guys know what the odds are of hitting on a guy that becomes a any sort of contributor down there. But one of them that did last year's Mr. Irrelevant, Brock Purdy. I think I see a lot of elements in Brock Purdy's game in Jake Haener. It's the exact same thing. Like, very similar physical dimensions, very similar weaknesses, and the same strength, which is making decisions in the moment. Like, those guys don't screw up. So if you put Haener with, a team that has ridiculous surrounding talent, like the 49ers had, and you put him with a good offensive coach who has the system, and you sort of spoon feed him, I could see him having the same sort of immediate impact. I mean, he's being propped up by a supporting cast, but like, he could do that because he ain't going to put the ball in harm's way. He's going to, the timing of the play, everything like that. Like, he's sort of a student of the game, and he's also respected by teammates, whatnot. A lot of similarities between those guys. I have the 6th quarterback on my board is Tanner McKee, because I think he's the only other guy that has like, starter tools, I suppose, like outside of the top 5. Because like, Haener, like Brock Purdy doesn't have starter tools. Looks like he's going to be a starter, but like, that's not, if you were just creating one from scratch, that ain't the way that you'd make it. Right. But like, Tanner McKee is super duper tall. He's mechanically sound. The accuracy can come and go, but he can be accurate to all levels of the field. Like, I think that there's things you can still work on with his processing of the field, but this is something that we've seen 1-to-1 with the guy that came before him, Davis Mills. Right. Davis Mills has overperformed, his draft slot. We got on the field pretty quickly, but Davis Mills is also a guy that was stranded, on those David Shaw teams with David Shaw had checked out 6 years ago or whatever. And especially on offense, they were directionless for years. It was weird. David Shaw used to be awesome at recruiting offensive linemen, and then it just stopped one day. I don't know if like his magic beans ran out, but like, he even signed some 5-stars, but they sucked. Foster Sarrell is one of them. Oh, and that Walker Little kid that people still think good in the NFL. He stunk too. But like, that's been Stanford's offensive line for years. And then they had some receivers themselves where the balls would clang off their hands or different stuff like that. So I would put Tanner McKee there. The last guy I would say that I like of the quarterback process, I'm a fan of Aiden O'Connell. He went down a little bit last year because some of the supporting cast left and stuff like that. And Mr. Jeff Brom, his head coach, his mentor, the guy who had built him up from being a walk-on into being like a scholarship starting quarterback and a good one in the Big Ten. He had one foot out the door, just like Lincoln did the year before at Oklahoma looking at USC. Mm-hmm. I think Jeff Brom was sitting dead red on leaving, and he ended up getting to leave for his alma mater at Louisville. But Aiden O'Connell, he ain't going to do anything for you outside the pocket. I mean, he just sitting there, whatever, but he knows what he's doing. He doesn't have a howitzer at all, but he is very accurate, short and intermediate. And he has a real knack for the timing of the passing play. So he puts it on the hands in rhythm consistently. I mean, like that was sort of Brahms' thing when you go back to his college career. Seems like he imparted that to Aiden O'Connell. Aiden O'Connell, again, the physical tools aren't all the way there, but at least you can win out to the intermediate level of the field with him. And he ain't going to make the mistakes either.
Yeah, we have, there's another quarterback who came from Purdue and was also pretty good at one point. Not as physical, but very accurate. Any chance at all to get to half a Drew Brees or no?
I don't think so, because I just think like Drew Brees had that superpower of accuracy that just so few guys have. I don't think O'Connell is quite that accurate, but like in terms of seeing the field and in terms of the timing and stuff like that, and in the rhythm, like short and intermediate, you do see him hitting the guys on the hands and stuff like that, like Breeze. But I mean, like he not going to offer you that kind of utility. There's some limitations there, but I think he could hang around a long time. And let me rephrase. I believe he will hang around for a decade as a backup quarterback in the NFL at least. And I think that there's a shot that he could be a caretaker starter for a period of time. Because his skills.
Those bridge guys can be valuable to teams in some places. But we want to thank you for coming on. We don't want to take up any more of your time. As always, it's always a pleasure to have you on. And Jay, you have anything else before we kind of get out of here, wrap this up?
No, that was great. I mean, I think we've done a show together around draft time now, like 3 years in a row. So, it's always great having you on to talk about this stuff, man. I just love like listening to him, be so passionate about it. It's a great time. So thanks for coming on. We appreciate it. And looking forward to maybe having you on next year again. So thanks, man.
Appreciate it, boys. Always good talking to you.
Absolutely, guys. That's it for us. We are going to see whether we come back for a show next week. I think we're going to take a week off since the draft starts, as Thor mentioned, next Thursday night. So it's going to be a great time. Can't wait to see what happens. And for this episode of High Floor Football, I'm Sam Wagman. He's Jay Arsht. We'll see you next week, maybe.